we see a car driving to a church in 1957, Lower Silesia. A priest gets out and takes the baby in the car to the church. He starts praying and begs to God to destroy this evil seed while looking at the baby. He takes out a knife and holds it above the baby while apologizing to him. The police come in before he can do anything to the baby, and they tell him to drop the knife. The priest says they don't understand anything, but they shoot him because he didn't drop the knife. He falls to the ground, and a police officer runs to the baby. We see the sky and we see the eclipse. Then we go to 30 years later. We see a man, Merrick, getting out of a bus. He opens a map and gets going. He arrives at a monastery. He knocks the door and the prior opens it. He invites him in. Merrick gets in, and the camera shows the haunted-looking tree in the yard. The prior tells him how grateful they are that he's here in this rural area. He talks about the place. He says that they call this place a sanatorium, and they heal the tormented here. Then he takes Merrick to a man named Brother Dawit. They tell him that they need to check his bag. Merrick gives it to Dawit, and the prior starts talking to him while Dawit checks the bag. The prior takes Merrick to his room. He says that there isn't electricity or a phone line, and he says that they don't normally go out after dark. Merrick thanks him, and the prior says it's good to have someone like him in a place like this, where evil makes its presence known all the time. Merrick says he's there for a reason. The prior laughs and leaves. Merrick takes off his clothes, and we see that he has the same mark that was on the baby. He opens a hidden compartment in his bag, and we see a gun hidden in his belongings. He gets out a piece of paper. He sits back on the bed and opens the paper. We see that it's the news of a missing woman, with the pictures of the other 7 women who went missing lately. Then we see all of them sitting at the dinner table. The prior says grace and they serve the food. Merrick looks at the unpleasant-looking food and looks at the ones around him. The monk next to the prior, Peter, looks uncomfortable, but the prior tells him to eat, and he does. Merrick takes a bite, and he looks like he's struggling to eat it. Then we see him walking in the hallway, while we hear the screams of the tormented people that the prior talked about. He looks inside one of the cells and sees Peter trying to feed a woman. Peter turns and looks at him. Then we see Merrick taking a bath in his room, and the cross starts shaking. We see them lined up in the hallway, and they take the woman in the cell somewhere. The prior comes and starts talking to Merrick about exorcism. They all follow the others and get into a room with a bed. We see them tying the woman to the bed, and the others standing behind the bed holding candles in their hands. They start recording it, and the prior starts praying while 2 monks stand next to the bed. The woman tries to move and turn around while the prior prays. She gets up, screams, and a wind comes up, raising dust from the ground. She lays back down, and he continues. The bed starts shaking, and the woman screams again. The cross in the prior's hand bursts into flames, but he keeps going. Merrick watches all of this in shock. Then we see him washing his face in his bathroom. He looks at himself and the mirror cracks. He touches one of the cracks, and it grows, and the mirror breaks. He hears his closet door opening and goes to look at it, but he doesn't see anything, so he closes it again. He gets out to the hallway and goes to a door. Dawit comes up behind him and asks if he needs anything. Merrick asks what's behind the door, and Dawit says it's the prior's room, and you can only get in if you're invited. Merrick goes away, and we see him at dinner again. The prior notices one of the monks not eating his food and sends Dawit to him. Dawit goes and whispers something to the monk's ear. He starts eating the food while crying, and Merrick watches them while all of this was happening. He takes a bite from his food and looks uncomfortable while doing it. Then we see him throwing up in the toilet. He notices something's wrong with him and goes to the mirror looking for something inside his mouth with his hands. He pulls out his tooth, and a fly comes out of it. Then we see him in front of the prior's room. He picks the lock and gets inside. He starts looking around and finds bottles of alcohol in the cabinet. Then he finds a secret room and gets inside. He sees a television and some tapes. He takes one and plays it. We see that it's the tape of the latest exorcism they did with the woman. Then he goes to that room and starts looking around. He finds a syringe under the bed and takes it to look at it closely. He then puts it on the bed and starts walking around. He steps in something and the bed shakes. He lifts up the carpet and sees a mechanism that shakes the bed every time it stepped on, right where one of the monks was standing. He hears footsteps and hides. He moves the curtain next to him when the noise goes away, and he finds a lever. He pulls it down and a fan works, making wind and moving the dirt on the ground. He continues to look around and finds the cross that the prior held during the exorcism. He fiddles around with it and finds a button that sets the cross on fire. He returns to his room and puts the cross on his wall into a drawer. Then we see all of them praying in the church. The prior tells Merrick to make the penitential act. Merrick goes to his place and starts, but the prior interrupts him and asks for him to do it in Latin. Merrick struggles to speak, and the prior says that's enough, and Peter continues instead of him. He goes back to his place and listens to the prayer. Then we see them having the same dinner again. Merrick takes a bite from his food, and a lock of hair comes into his mouth. He spits it out, and we see him throwing up in the toilet. He gets out and notices the cross is back on the wall. He gets his bag, opens the hidden compartment, and takes his gun with him. He burns the newspaper and goes to the front door, but sees that the gate in front of it is locked. He turns back and notices some monks burying a coffin in the backyard. He goes and looks at the cell that the woman was in. He doesn't see her in there, but he notices blood on the ground. Peter comes up behind Merrick and tells him to go to the church and wait for him in the confessional. Merrick goes there and Peter comes. He tells him that they are watching his every step. Peter says that they know he's looking for something, and he's playing with fire. He tells Merrick to keep it low and not to ask questions. He tells him how he tried to run away, but they found him and he had a brutal punishment. Peter says he needs to go, but Merrick stops him and says he's a police officer. Merrick tells him that the police don't meddle with the affairs of the church since the murder of that priest, so they sent him there undercover. He tells Peter that he's there because of a missing person case, and he needs to finish what he started. Merrick asks if the exorcisms are a scam, and Peter says yes. He asks why he does it, and Peter says it's because of the money they give him. They talk a little more, and Peter tells him that they bury the women in the little graveyard in the backyard. He tells Merrick to be careful and leaves. Merrick looks around the room and notices the scratches on the ground. He pushes the cabinet and sees a hole on the wall, covered with a green liquid. He sticks his hand in the hole and finds an eye on top of some sticks. The eye moves and he throws it to the ground. He starts puking from the green liquid and flies comes out of it. He hears a sound at the door and turns to look at it. He then turns around and sees a woman made from the liquid on the ground. He gets scared and steps onto the eye. He goes to the graveyard and picks up a shovel. He starts digging the grave he saw and gets the casket out. He opens it, but finds it empty. Dawid comes up behind him and puts a sack over his head. Merrick wakes up, tied up to his bed, and sees Dawid sitting in the corner, watching him. He tries talking to him, but Dawid tells him to keep it quiet. The door opens, and we see one of the monks with a food tray and the prior. The monk puts the tray next to the bed and leaves. The prior comes in and talks to Merrick. Then he tries to make him eat the food, but Merrick refuses. Dawid hits him for refusing and forcefully makes him eat it. Merrick asks why he is eating them, and the prior says it's medicine. He tells him to not make it hard, and he has to finish all 4 portions. Then we hear Merrick screaming from outside of the room. He wakes up in the night and sees Dawid sleeping. He frees himself and sees Dawid looking at him. Merrick runs to his gun, and they start fighting. He shoots Dawid through a pillow. He gets his stuff back and gets out of the room. He goes to the kitchen and starts looking around. He finds a tooth in the meal and closes the lid. Then he opens a door and sees the bodies of the missing women hanging from the ceiling, some of them missing the half of their body. Peter comes up behind him and scares him. He sees the room and gets shocked. He then convinces Merrick to come with him to show him something important about. Merrick agrees and they go to a library. He opens a book and starts reading from it. He talks about a ritual and a chosen one to bring the evil to this world. Peter tells Merrick that he's the chosen one, and they are trying to complete the ritual. Merrick looks at the book and sees the symbol on his shoulder in there. Peter says he knew he was the chosen one, and tells him that he knows a way to leave there. Merrick doesn't believe him at first, but Peter convinces him. Peter tells him the underground tunnels, and he was going to use it, but they caught him. He shows Merrick the scars they gave him, and asks him to trust him. Merrick agrees and tells him to lead the way. They get into the tunnels and start walking. Peter says he had planned it all and it's perfect. They start walking through the tunnel and they hear a sound. They turn around, but see nothing but a mouse. Merrick starts walking again, but 2 monks attack him and tackle him to the ground. They start beating him up, and Merrick looks at Peter. Peter points a gun towards him. Merrick says he knew it, and one of the monks hits his head, causing him to pass out. We see Peter getting ready for the ritual. The prior wakes up Merrick, and we see him tied up with other monks gathered around him. The prior tells him that they made them assign him to this case since he wouldn't do this willingly. He says that they actually mean well with what they will do. He continues to talk and shows him the well. He says it's called the Gateway to Hell, and that's why the monastery is built there. He says that they have been waiting for him for 800 years. The prior says that when the ritual is over, the evil will enter his body and rule the world. He adds, saying only one thing is missing, blood of the innocent, and they all turn to the door. They bring in the missing woman. Merrick yells at them to stop, but they cut her throat and collect her blood. The monks drink it, and finally the prior turns to Merrick, who's praying to God. The prior starts calling Satan, and the monks repeat after him, but nothing happens. He turns around and asks Peter, and he confirms it's him. He prays again, but nothing happens. Merrick starts laughing, and we see the prior and Peter talking. The prior asks Peter if they missed something, and he says no, they did what was written in the book. They continue to talk about it, and the prior asks what will they do now. Then we see Peter talking to the monks. He says that they did what needed to be done, and maybe it was all wrong. He tells them to go back to their cells and meet again tomorrow like nothing happened. He says that they can explain it all, but one of the monks says that they will look for Merrick. Peter turns around and stabs Merrick, saying he's sorry that it all came to this. Merrick stops moving, and Peter tells the monks to throw him into the well. They do, and he tells them to return to their cells. We see the prior smoking and drinking in his room. We see the cross on his wall turning upside down, but he doesn't notice it. He plays a song and continues to drink while singing along to it. Peter comes in when he is sitting on the ground and singing to himself, drunk. He takes him to the bed and makes him lay down. The prior tells him to sit down and tells him how good he is. Peter says he knows, and the prior falls asleep. Peter gets up, takes the pillow under his head, and chokes him with it. Then we see the monks carrying the bodies in the kitchen to the backyard and burning them. One of the monks comes to Brother Antoni and says that he needs to go to the prior's room. He gets in and asks how it happened. Peter lies about it while crying, Antoni hugs him and says that he'll be the prior now. Peter says he knows. And we see a fly coming out of the previous prior's nose. The fly flies to the well and lands on Merrick's body. He wakes up, gasping for air, and tries to collect himself together for a while. He tries to get up and looks at the bones around him. Then his bones start breaking, and his body starts burning while he screams. We see the others at the church praying for the previous prior. Peter tries to continue to pray, but he can't talk. He starts shaking and drops the book from his hand. The monks look at him, confused, and Peter starts to levitate. His bones start breaking, and he tries to scream. Then the fly starts to come out of his body, and all the flesh in his body turns to flies. His clothes fall to the ground as the monks watch all of this in shock. Then they see Satan rising with his new, non-human body, and they stand there stunned. The evil comes up in front of them and screams. They all try to run away and get away from him, but they freeze. The statue of Jesus on the cross comes alive and it starts moving. The Satan turns around and looks at it. He opens his hands to his sides, and the monk starts levitating. All of their bones break to shape a cross and they turn upside down. The camera turns upside down with them too. We see the other people in the cells in that position too. We see the flowers blossoming. The building starts to crack, and we see the haunted-looking tree in the backyard blossoming too. We see the monastery from afar, and we see the skies breaking and coming down. The movie ends there.